All right,
but I've done it
unmuted.
before. All right,
You're
awesome.
unmuted.
We're on.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Steadfast podcast. You're here with Chris and Pastor Nate from Steadfast Gretna. And so today we are going beyond Sunday.
Yeah.
On Sunday, we went over chapter 1 of James. We've been in James chapter 1 the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so let's just start there and
Yeah.
kind of maybe go even farther. You mentioned that, Nate, that you had not been able to go as far as you wanted to on Sunday. So this is why we're here.
That's exactly right.
So let's go deeper into James and wherever else it leads.
Yeah, and we really haven't had a podcast since we started James, I don't think. So
no, we haven't had a podcast for a little while for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. Lots of stuff going on.
Sickness, stuff going on. Yeah. I was sick for 2.5 weeks. Week. Brutal. Okay, cool. So let's talk about James.
Yeah, book of James. We're in it. We're 3 weeks in already, actually, and we're still, like you said, we're still in the first chapter, but we are 3 weeks into James. James is it's so packed full of stuff. I think we could probably spend months in James and not completely cover everything in there, at least from a preaching on Sunday morning standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But just it's such a practical book. It's such a practical instruction. You see James, you look at James. When you read James, you get kind of like a cup of coffee, or like they always describe a cup of coffee. They're like, oh, there's touches of this and there's flavors of that.
Notes,
yes, right? And the notes in James are like, there's notes from Proverbs, there's notes from Sermon on the Mount, really from all of Jesus' teaching, which makes sense. I mean, James is Jesus' brother. He's been around him, and so it's just really practical, hit you in the face kind of instruction for the church. So that's good.
What was kind of the reason we went into James?
Kind of a couple reasons. Like on the heels of Nehemiah was kind of our last series that we did, and that was very much just talking about action, faith being lived out in action, because that's kind of the way Nehemiah responded to the call that God gave him. And James is very much the same way, of like faith being lived out in action. I kind of titled our series like "Faith That Works," right?
Okay.
It's how does the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that he came, that he was, he came to earth, he was preached, he died on the cross, he was buried, he was resurrected after the third day. He says that when you put your faith in me, I have paid the penalty for your sin, and that allows us to have a relationship with him and a relationship with the Father, and really establishes that relationship that we can have with him. And so James says that when you understand all of that should probably change your life in some pretty significant ways. And James is really just kind of punch you in the face with, okay, these are the ways that you should be affected as a believer if that's what you believe. There's a lot of controversy around the book of James. There has been for centuries. Martin Luther really didn't like James that much.
Well,
historically,
a little bit of that is in the title of what, faith that works.
Yes,
because it's been this perceived. I think it's kind of a perceived battle. It's not. I don't think it's real, but there's a perceived battle that James is focused on works and Paul was focused on faith, and so there's like this. I don't know, what is that competition between the two. I don't believe that that's what it shows, but so there is a little bit of that. There are some folks over the years that haven't liked the inclusion of James in the Bible, which is interesting. Well, we can talk a little bit about James, and who he was, for anybody who was not at who has not been at Steadfast, or maybe you're listening and you don't go to the church. James is the brother of Jesus. You'll see it says half brother. That's because when they say that, when he has said to be the half brother. That's because um, he was conceived by Mary, who did not have relations with Joseph. So
Right.
Joseph is not his biological
Right.
father. So you'll see half brother,
Yeah.
along with Jude, and I don't remember all of his brother and sisters'
I
names,
don't remember right
but
off either.
James and Jude both wrote letters that are in the Bible, both half brothers of Jesus. Um,
And it kind of leads to like
yeah.
one of the other reasons that we picked James, and that is generally like we try to follow up Easter Sunday with something that's related to the resurrection, right? Like
Okay.
how does the resurrection play out? And we've done different things through the years. Pastor Greg's done some things where he picks some different stuff out. But the interesting thing about James, and one of the kind of the reasons I picked it out is like James isn't a believer in Jesus until after
Mm.
the resurrection. It doesn't seem, it really doesn't seem like until Jesus appears to him post resurrection that he really believes in him. And we know that Paul references in Corinthians that he appears to James after he appears to the apostles. We know historically that James is like this pillar in the church in Jerusalem. And so, really, it is a result of the resurrection that James is a follower of Jesus Christ. He's not a follower of his brother until after the resurrection. That's all signs would point to that. And so, I thought it was just really fitting. I'm like, hey, we've just talked about the resurrection, just celebrated the resurrection. Now let's jump into somebody that was directly affected by the resurrection, and James is one of those people, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. Cool. What else do we want to say about James as far as I mean I mean another thing too, not only is there a moment in time where it looks like he has a conversion where he
mhm.
believes that his brother is not only Jesus Christ but is God.
Yes,
And then also that leads him to become one of the pillars of the church, a
yeah,
leader in the
yep,
church at that time, to write the letter of James. Now, in this case, the letter is to believers
yeah,
who are basically fleeing persecution.
sure,
Um, and this was another cool fact because I don't think about it this way. I think if you ask people what's the first book, what was the first letter of the New Testament written?
yes,
I think most people know that it's not Matthew.
right,
However, in my mind, you just kind of think like, okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
yeah.
It
It's
just
one of
goes.
the
It
gospels,
goes in
maybe.
the or. But
Yeah,
James, which is all the way back about after Hebrews,
yes,
is more than likely the first book of the New Testament
yeah,
written, which is a really cool and interesting fact. And I think for me at least, as I think about it, I go, wow, if those are the first words divinely given by God,
yeah.
right, for us, does that change
Hmm.
something? And
Yeah, I mean, and it certainly gives them some context too. James talks a lot, and we talked about it on Sunday. But James talks about being hearers of the word, right? And when we hear that, when we see that or read that, we think, oh, people heard, they heard the message. Um, but really, there was no written message. The gospel wasn't written down before the book of James. Like there just wasn't any books of it. And so we kind of talked about that whole idea of like when it says not just hearers of the word, but doers, it's not just physically hearing the word spoken to you. That is one way we hear God's word. But it's also like when we read God's word, because we have that ability now to read what he has written for
yes,
us, that translates to hearing. Like when I read it off
mm,
the page, that's the equivalent of what James is talking about when he's saying hearing. But there's some context that when you say, well, James is the first book,
yes,
yes, everybody that James was talking to had been a hearer of the word. They hadn't been a reader of it yet. They'd only been hearers of it.
that's a really good.
So
So that's a very good point because it almost leads to how how we read it. So
mhm,
if we're going to read it from the perspective you just for what you
Yeah.
from what you just shared is how do we read it from a forward-looking perspective? Like, okay, here are expectations in the future, and that's
Yeah.
which is interesting and challenging
It is challenging.
because and also when James, which I know we're going to get into, when James talks about renewal,
Yeah.
and we've been talking about renewal a lot in our church. When he talks about that, and when Paul talks about renewal, and when we see renewal throughout Scripture, it's about moving forward,
Yeah.
like, and that rebirth. And so the gospel is the answer
Yes.
to rebirth.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the answer
Yeah.
to being born again.
Yeah, really.
So,
And really the gospel is like
Yeah.
we think about, a lot of times I think we think about faith in I made a decision to follow Jesus Christ, which is legitimate. We legitimately have to decide that's what I want to do, right?
Mhm.
But this idea of faith that is ongoing, right? It's not I decide to be a Christian and now I'm a Christian and that's all that it's taken, right? And that's a little bit what James is kind of alluding to here, of saying, well, you don't just align yourself with this sect of Judaism that believes in Jesus Christ. Like, no, this is something different. This is something new, and it's something that's active, and it's actively influencing the way that we live our lives out daily. And Christian, that's what believing in Jesus Christ and following Jesus Christ is, an active pursuit. It's something that is ongoing. It's not something that we do once, and we forget about it. It is uh, an active part of who we are and how we live. And that's really, James lays that out pretty clearly in his book of like, no, it affects basically every area of your life when you understand what the gospel is and you know what it is. And not saying we come to that understanding immediately and we're there, but it is that idea of like it's ongoing, and that idea of renewal is ongoing, right? It's not just
Right.
something that happens one time.
Right.
Our faith puts us in the right place with God, and that is there's a beginning to that. But there's this whole, how does it play out in our lives, and what does it look like when we not only hear God's word, but we understand God's word and we live out God's word. So that's kind of James in a little bit of a nutshell of just like, yeah, this is what happens when you understand it. So
Well, and that kind of brings up I guess, another debate of whether faith is a noun or a verb, which is
sure, right.
I think we tend to talk about it. We often talk about faith like a noun.
Yeah.
Um, but there's some valid arguments and uses for faith as actually a verb, as an action, as something that takes work, that's something that it takes commitment.
Yeah.
And because it is a relationship, and just like any relationship, for a relationship to be a good one, it takes work.
Yeah.
And it takes and what's amazing is that God is always faithful.
Sure. Right.
And so if we continually pursue him and seek renewal in him, he is always there.
He's always there. Yeah.
So
yeah,
which is really powerful. Well, we can we can get into James a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that we had talked about his conversion after
Jesus
appears to him, and then one of the things that's so cool is just we know that he believes, because in that first sentence, bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, which shows that he believes his brother Jesus is not only Jesus Christ,
right,
but God.
Yeah.
He is God.
Yeah.
So
that is really interesting, because that that introductory phrase packed. There's so much packed into that
Yeah.
of just saying James didn't. He wasn't like, well, hey, I was born brother Jesus Christ, and now so you should listen to me. He's like, no.
Yep. That's right.
He's like,
I'm a bond servant.
I'm a bond servant. I'm a slave. My translation says I'm a slave.
Yeah, that's true. He doesn't ever say like that is a really good point because he at no point he's like, hey, and I grew up with this guy, and this and there's some that's a whole other thing we can go down the rabbit trail. I don't know if you've ever heard of all the apocrypha.
Oh yeah,
where there's stories of Jesus making
growing up and
little
all that
birds
stuff
out of the mud and all that, and healing James from a snake bite. All of things which all legends and that we don't believe to be true.
Right.
But you would think that if those were true, he'd probably say, and then I saw him make birds out of mud, and then he healed me by a snake and all this stuff. But he doesn't. He says, I am a bondservant of God.
Yeah.
Like he understands exactly.
Exactly. I mean, even the title that he gives him, he says the Lord Jesus Christ. And like those three words together, like the Lord is the word that if you read the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that word, whenever Yahweh is used, the Greek Septuagint translates that word as Lord, the same word that we translate as Lord.
Yeah, did you say it? Kyrios?
Kyrios.
Yeah,
yes.
Kyrios.
Yep.
Yes.
And so translates that same word
yes
over. So James is acknowledging that Jesus is God, and then his name Jesus, the Savior, or the anointed one as the Messiah, right? And so he kind of in those three words really is like, this is who Jesus Christ is. Like he's not only God, he's also the Savior, the one that saves, and he's also the Messiah, the one that's been anointed, right? So that combination of words that he refers to Jesus as really speaks a lot to what James thinks of, how James thinks about Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's a great kind of kick off the book of just saying, look, I'm not I'm not a casual follower, I'm a slave.
Yep.
And I'm a slave to the person who's the God, the Savior, and the Messiah. And that person is his brother Jesus. So it's you do a whole sermon on the first three those first three
That's
words,
right.
right?
Well, and also as a slave, again, because I believe that I actually have some notes on that, and that is that when he does that word for servant that he uses coming from doulos, is not it's not the idea of we are slaves in the fact that like we're just I don't know, doing all your dirty work.
Right.
We're slaves to a master we love and respect.
Yeah.
And so he is a servant or doulos committed to the master whom he loves and respects. The perfect master and father.
Yes.
And so it's he's using language that to us it gets translated as bond servant or slave or
or servant,
but
translation.
It is a specific type of servant, which is cool because it should not be. We are not just
we're not
mindless. Slave. I'm a mindless. No, none of that. And which again, it shows so much value in who God, what God thinks of us.
There's so much value.
There's so much value. Like God literally sent his son to die for us.
Yeah.
Well, he's not going to do that if you're worthless, garbage,
right?
So anyways, it's actually quite an honor to be a servant of of the master.
And the fact that we consider ourselves servants, but God considers us sons and daughters.
Yes.
And how cool that is, that picture of how we respond to God is like we should be slaves, and he's like, no, I adopt you as children. It's so cool. There's the introduction of just like, this is who I am, and then he kind of just jumps right in. Like there's no like slow, hey, greetings like are in some of the other epistles. There's none of that. He just jumps right into the here's what I want you to know kind of section. And he talks about uh right there in verse 2, consider it great joy or pure joy, my brothers, when you experience various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And endurance must complete its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. And then he goes on and talks about that, and we can kind of get into that a little bit. But that first statement, like considering it pure joy,
Well, yeah, like what? How would we consider that?
right?
I in a little bit of research on this, just as far as the word for trials being parasmos,
Hmm.
um, which means solicitation to sin,
Yeah,
and or temptation and solicitation to sin, which does change it for me in my mindset
yeah,
or of that, because I think of when I think of trials, just normally and naturally, I think of like hard stuff.
yeah,
I don't think of sin
yeah,
or the solicitation to sin.
sure.
So why do I consider it as joy?
Right. Well, and just thinking about like how, we don't think about it in that way, but sometimes hard situation, I mean, inevitably hard situations lead us to a point of testing of our faith, right? Even if they're not in themselves solicitations to sin. I run up against a difficulty in my day, and what's the first thing you jump
Mm,
to of like, well, God, why'd you put this in my life? What are you
sure.
doing, God? Right? And that is right there is a solicitation to sin,
Yeah. Or getting mad at somebody
or
else
getting
for
mad at somebody.
saying that they caused this
Right,
problem for me.
exactly.
My
And so,
stupid boss
yes,
is constantly on me.
right. It's this idea of like when we run into
Mm,
frustration, like how do we respond that? I mean, even a little bit further, he talks about uh being slow to anger, right? Because that doesn't accomplish God's righteousness. And so I think when you run into trials, like some are physical. I mean, these people had experienced some real persecution in their life, and that real
yeah.
persecution could very well have led people to say, this Jesus stuff, maybe this is a little bit too hard for me.
Mm.
Maybe this isn't something I want to do. Um, and and just that idea of like we tend to think that the best way for us to be good Christians is to like weed out all of the stuff that might cause us to be tempted to sin, right? I mean, if we just take all, I mean, wouldn't it be easy if you just take all the temptation out of your life and just be like, there is no temptation. I don't have to deal with any of it, right? My walk with the Lord is like this. I don't deal with any temptation. I've cut all that stuff out. I've even taken the opportunity to be led into temptation out of my life. And I'm not saying there's not some value in some of that. Of saying if there's something that I know is a temptation that I'm going to struggle with and I might not be able to handle, that's a good thing to take that out. But we tend to think of like if all the temptation was out of my life, it would just be peachy keen, right? And
Hmm.
that's not what James says. He's like,
Hmm.
nope, temptation that when we are forced to struggle with our faith
Hmm.
and forced
Yeah.
to struggle with how do I follow Jesus Christ the way that he's called me to follow him, that is the trial that actually builds our faith. And if we take all those things out of our life, we don't ever experience any of those trials. If I never have to decide whether or not I do uh, something that is morally questionable, if I never have to decide that, that's my faith never gets tested. You know?
So what do you think then? That's a that's a really good point. What do you think then? Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're
I'm still short of breath these days. Oh my goodness. So what do you think is that? What's that perfect result?
uh,
What is the perfect result? Because it says,
yeah,
and let endurance have its perfect result.
yeah, yeah. Uh, this translation that I have says but endurance must do its complete work. Um, and I think that is one of those things of like, as we use the Christian word sanctification a
Okay.
lot, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this idea of sanctification, that is that God is taking us from the people that we are, and he's turning us into the people that he wants us to be.
Yeah.
And that is a process, right? And it's not necessarily a process that, like, I think
It's not.
my personal opinion
Yeah.
is we never get there in this life. We never get to complete sanctification. We're never, other than the finished work of Jesus Christ, which makes us right with God, that justification that we have. But I think God's always working on us in ways to turn us into the people that he wants us to be. I think there is some completion in temptations, not saying that we would never struggle with something again, but I think when we struggle and we're forced to think about these situations that we're in, and when we respond in faith, and when we do the things that we're supposed to do in those situations, I think that that is an exercise that builds, it builds kind of spiritual muscle, right? Like you're faced with that temptation once and you overcome it once, and then the next time you're faced with it, it's not as big of a deal, right? I mean, it's like I go over here next door and I, put 180 pounds on the bench press. The first 6 times I do it, I'm like, I might not even get the bar off my chest the sixth time, right? If I keep doing that for months on end, pretty soon I get to the point where like that's not a big deal for me. And I think that's kind of a good picture, a little bit. I mean, analogies all fall short a little bit, but it is a good picture of what James is talking about when he's saying our dealing with trials, dealing with temptation, builds in us this spiritual muscle, spiritual muscle that is endurance. Like the endurance is our spiritual muscle of like we've built that up so that the next time we encounter that, we need, it's not as big of a deal. And that's not to say that it never happens again, because I mean, I think the analogy of the weightlifting probably works there too. Of like, hey, if we
Well, if you walk away
if
from
we
the
walk
gym
away
for a
from
few months,
exactly,
right,
we lose some of that, right?
right,
And so, yeah, it is that that's what I get when I read it. I'm like,
okay,
that idea of like we're building spiritual muscle. So when it says, it must complete its work, I think the completing its work is like it's conditioning us
yeah,
into being the people that, now it's not that I'm never tempted by something, but it just becomes less and less a real temptation. It becomes less of a trial and more of it's just something out there because I've trained myself how to respond to it. You know, and not saying that we'd never take, I know I said kind of towards the beginning, not saying that we don't take things that we stumbling blocks out of our way when we are faced with them sometimes. Like, if it's something that I can't handle, I need to weed that out. I need to take that out because I know that that's not something I'm ready to deal with, and maybe I won't ever be ready to deal with it. And maybe that's how I respond to that trial of saying, look, the trial isn't me thinking the right way about this. The trial of this case is me taking that out of my life so that it's not something that I struggle with, you know.
yeah,
So there's a few ways to deal with it, but I think that's really what James is talking about. And I like how he says consider it great joy. It's like it isn't great joy. We're supposed to consider it. We're supposed to think about it in a way that when we encounter it, we judge it to be pure joy. That word consider there is a word that they use. It's actually the word that they use for rulers, right? The Greek word, I can't pronounce, and I don't remember what the Greek word was exactly, but the word that they use there is a word that they use for rulers or judges. Somebody that hears something and then they consider it and then they make a judgment on it, right? And so when we go through trials and temptations and we're like, this is not pleasant, we're not saying, oh, this is a yippee, this is a joy kind of thing. We're like, no, we're looking at it and we're thinking about it and we're saying to ourselves, this really is something good. and something that should cause joy, even if it isn't our immediate reaction to it.
Well, it is also indicative of who we are
Yeah.
and who we have been set apart to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in a way that should bring us joy. Like, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not like, I'm basically judge. I'm saying, hey, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to partake in that. I am going to worship my God. I am going to focus here because I've been set apart.
Yeah.
And it should, and then that's also forward looking
Yes.
because it's looking at why am I set apart, which is a whole other,
Right.
we could talk about that too,
Yes,
as far
we
as
can.
like, why am I worth dying for?
Yes.
And so I think a lot of the times we think, why am I worth dying for when I think of all the past?
Sure.
But why I'm worth dying for is actually the future.
Yeah.
It's from right now on.
Yeah.
Why I'm worth dying for, and let endurance have its perfect result. Um, I don't think I fully understand what that perfect result is in the future
No.
for me and for us.
Oh yeah. I don't
You know,
think
what
any
is
of
that?
us.
What is that perfect result later? Because um, it's not like, hey, I'm going to die for all of you, and then we'll see what happens after that. No, there's a plan.
Right. Yeah. It's not. It's
And while we are not going to reach maybe perfection on earth, just my flesh maybe not
Yeah.
worth, but he did say it is finished,
Yeah.
and he took all that on, and so the future is something crazy.
Yeah.
Because there's no why would he do that if there was,
Yeah.
if there was no plan?
Yeah. He definitely has a plan,
Here's the plan,
and
it's gonna,
there's something in saying, was I worth dying for? In myself, I wasn't worth dying for. The only reason that Jesus Christ died for me is because he said, I'm going to do it.
hmm,
Right. I mean, he even says it here in 18. By his own choice, he gave us new birth. Like, it's his own choice of saying, I have value because Jesus Christ says I have value. Because he died for me, because he said, I have value in this person that I've created. You know, uh, there's some value in that, just saying, you know what, I did it because I wanted to. And that's a cool,
Yeah.
to me, that's a cool part about God, of like, he didn't have to do all this stuff. He didn't have to do. He doesn't have to do any of this, but
hmm,
it's in his plan. It's his perfect plan. And you're right in turning us into the people that he wants us to be, because it says that we bring glory to him, and that's really kind of the ultimate goal of where we're at, is we're bringing glory to Jesus Christ in the end, right? And that's, it's just kind of mind blowing to think about.
yeah,
Like, yeah, now that we've been rescued, so there's that. So anyway, he talks about that, and he kind of throws in here the whole wisdom part of,
yes,
like,
yeah. Let's go.
verse 5 says, if you lack wisdom, you should ask God. And when you read that, just apart from everything else, you're like, oh, that's great. I want to have wisdom. Wisdom seems
Mhm.
like a good thing to have,
Yep.
But the wisdom, like, it's all in the. There's a reason he writes it in the way he does. It's in the order, and the wisdom there is like the wisdom that says, it's great joy when I encounter difficulty, and it's the wisdom that is, uh, I don't know how to do this on my own. God, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
And it is wisdom. Like, it's probably worth talking about, what is wisdom. Like, when you hear wisdom, what do you think of hearing wisdom?
Well, I think of wise choices.
Yeah.
I'm using the same word in the,
That's all right.
but yeah, wise choices, smart choices, or being able, or discernment. I think of
Yeah,
discernment
discernment, right?
too. For I probably more so recently think of discernment in this
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. And you think of discernment, you're like, what does discernment mean, right? And it's like,
Mhm.
it's having the knowledge of what's right and wrong, or having the knowledge in the situation of what it is that I'm supposed to do. And then it's not just having the knowledge of it,
Right.
but it's actually applying the knowledge. It's like the right thing done rightly,
Right.
you know?
Because I
And
think Satan knows what's right and wrong.
yeah, he totally knows what's
And
right
he
and
just
wrong.
chooses wrong.
Yes. Yes. He knows what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
It's not just, and sometimes I think we get hung up on the knowledge end of it. Like, if you don't know what's right and wrong, ask God. God will tell you what's right and wrong. That's true. Like that knowledge is there. But here it's talking about the wisdom, which is not just knowing what's right and wrong, but having the ability to do what's right and wrong, what's right instead of what's wrong, I should say.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I love about James here is uh, he doesn't just say, "Let him ask of God. If he lacks wisdom, let him ask." He then tells us how.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
says,
I like
"Ask in
that.
faith,"
Yeah.
and then that's a whole other rabbit trail, just going down the of what faith is and where with the words for that. But I think that's cool because it's all right there. In some cases, you're like, oh, let's go, let's go here to learn what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But in this case, he's just let him ask of God and how in faith,
Yes. Yeah.
without any doubting.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's interesting too, because like when you look at that, you're like, what is the doubt there? Like if you ask God for wisdom, what's the doubt? Is the doubt that uh God's gonna give you the wisdom, or is there a doubt uh that God's wisdom is good wisdom?
I think
Like,
there's some doubt in ourselves.
hmm,
There's some doubt that we're gonna that we can even um that we're even worth asking,
yeah,
that we're even worth, having wisdom.
yeah,
Like, can we even do that?
yeah. And is that what he's talking about here? Because
I
like
don't know
he
if that's
gives a
what he's talking
pretty
about,
he
but
gives a pretty like strong, like if somebody doubts, they're like a person tossed by the sea, right?
driven and tossed by the
Yeah.
wind. Yeah, right.
So when you start digging into that, what does a doubt in that situation mean? And what is James saying? Like if you're asking without doubting, what is it that you're doubting? And I think, and this is my take on it. I think the doubting in that situation is when God gives an answer,
Hmm.
it's doubting whether or not that's the right answer.
Okay.
That's my take on this. When I read it and I think about it in context, it's not. I mean, we all have doubts. We all have doubts all the time. Like God doesn't really ever uh, really punish people in the Bible for saying, you know, I'm just not sure. Uh, he usually responds pretty generous. I mean, he just says it right there. Uh, he gives to all generously and without criticizing. God's not sitting there saying, "Oh man, Nate, why in the world are you asking for wisdom on this again?"
Yeah.
Right? He's not asking that. I mean, I've taught some school, and like I've had kids ask questions about things where you're like, "Okay, you just asked that yesterday, and maybe even the day before, and I told you the answer, and you came back to me and asked the question again." And I'm like, at some point, then I'm just like, look, I can't give you the answer again. But God isn't like that. Like he doesn't criticize on that point. He gives generously without criticizing. So like he understands we struggle with stuff. There's no temptation that you're dealing with. Like God's like, you are ridiculous for dealing with that temptation. It's not the way he works, right? I mean, what James is saying. It's like he doesn't criticize when you ask for wisdom,
Hmm.
but then when he gives you the wisdom, it's probably best to say, okay, God, I know your answer is the right answer, and I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to take it into my own hands and do it. And that's when he gets to the end of this passage where he says like a doubter uh is like the surging sea driven and tossed by the wind. You know, it's not when you ask God for wisdom, it's not a smorgasbord then of like, well, I'll take your advice this time, God, but next time I might not. And
Sure.
or maybe I don't think that's the best idea for my life. Uh, I want to pick and choose what it is I want to do. You know, I want to justify.
Yeah.
I want to justify my own actions. You know, when God tells me to do something and I'm tempted to do something and I say, God, I don't know if I really should do this or not. And God says, no, you definitely shouldn't do this. And I say, you know, but it seems good for me and I do it in this. I think that's what James is talking about with the doubt here. You know, there's certainly the idea of like, I could doubt that God will give me the wisdom, but I think the more it plays into the doubt is when God does give me the wisdom, what do I do with it?
Right.
You know,
Do I value it?
do I
Or
value it or
am I
not?
going to even obey it?
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, I think for me, I read it as probably a lot of stuff. I think it is doubting his, um, even his sovereignty, like,
Yeah.
and kind of disrespecting, well, definitely disrespecting him and not obeying. But I also think um, there is doubt in ourselves too to follow,
Right.
to be able to, and when it comes to renewal, and identity is a whole other
Hmm.
piece to this. Knowing who we are,
Yep.
who God created us to be, and
Yep.
then why He sent His Son to die for us. There is an identity there that demands, um, faith.
Yeah.
It demands for us to
Yeah.
walk in faith without doubting Him or who He has called us to be.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then we will not be driven and tossed. We will not be a double-minded man, unstable in all of our
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Um,
I like that term that he uses there, double-minded. It's
yeah.
kind of the idea of somebody who's indecisive,
Yes.
right? Like you're
Because they're a lot. Most people that are indecisive are not confident.
right,
They're not confident in even
right.
in themselves.
Yeah. And some of it's just like it's the amount of trust you put in the answer that God gives you, right?
Mhm.
Like, do am I going to decisively trust what God tells me through his word, uh, through prayer, through time spent with him? Am I going to decisively trust that? Or am I going to just waffle back and forth, pick my own way sometimes, pick God's way sometimes?
Yeah.
You know, just like you said, this is too hard for me. I can't do it. God prompts us to do something in wisdom, and we just
Mhm.
say, "Well,
Yeah.
that's good advice, God, but
Right.
like I don't. That's not who I am. I don't think I
That's not
could
a
do that."
strength of mine.
Right? I'm the same way sometimes. It's like when God prompts me to do something, sometimes I'm like, that's just not really my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And and James kind of calls that out in us. I mean, it is pretty convicting. Um,
Which he calls it out, and then he calls out, kind of himself in a way, which I also find really interesting and well written because he says, "But the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high
mhm.
position." And I think it's cool he uses brother.
Yeah, right. Right.
I'm not
The
saying that he
brother.
uses that
Yes.
because of that reason, but it's great writing.
Yeah. Well, and I
And
think it's interesting, like, a way that I read this as I was preparing for the sermon that I really hadn't thought about before, because we kind of take these verses out of their context a lot of times, not in a necessarily in a pulling it from context in a bad way, but sometimes we just take them out and we talk about these verses 9 to 11
uh-huh.
uh, apart from everything else. But we talk about that, and James is saying, okay, you're being tested, right?
Yep.
And now he gets to 9. He's like, the brother of humble circumstances is tested. He's tested to say, God, why am I in this low position? And why don't I have what that person has? And how come I'm here? Right. And so the temptation for that person, the trial for that lowly brother is saying, why don't I have what they have? It's coveting, right? And then he turns around, he says, the brother that's in high position has the temptation then to depend on his wealth, right? He leans on his wealth and says, my wealth is going to take care of me. And uh and James here is like, no, your wealth dries up with scorching heat, its flower falls off, its beautiful appearance is destroyed. And the rich man will wither away while pursuing his activities. You know, and a lot of times we read this as kind of a condemnation on people that are rich, and I think really what it's talking about. I'm not saying there's not some teaching that James has about being
Sure.
greedy, but the thing here I think is that test of endurance right there of saying, hey, if I whether God's blessed me with a lot of stuff or God's blessed me with no stuff, there is a trial in both of those situations that I need to address. Um, and if I don't have anything, I exalt in that. And if I have a lot of stuff, I don't exalt in a lot of stuff that I have. I still depend on God for what I actually need.
Well, and there's identity in this too.
Yeah,
I mean, throughout it, as far as when we know and accept who we are, who God made us to be,
hmm
we're going to glory in our high position in Him.
yeah,
We're
right,
going to glory, and we're also going to be humble and glory in that humiliation.
yeah,
And then understanding that our pursuits will fade away,
yeah,
um,
yep,
which is why we're focused on Him
yeah,
and what He uh, is calling us to do.
yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of identity in that.
There's a ton. Uh, you know, he talks about just the blessing of enduring the trials. Um, he talks about, you know, this crown of life that God has promised for those who love Him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people really translate that as this idea of like the crown of life is a figurative statement of eternal life,
Oh,
uh, as opposed to maybe a specific reward that God has set aside for those people that endure in these trials. Um, you know,
well, it's
there's kind of
also
two different ways to look at that. You
it's
know,
also just life,
yeah, right,
because then he goes on. He talks about how um, he talks about the other side of that, which is
yeah,
death.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and let's see. Then it talks about uh, God does not tempt. God
right,
cannot be tempted by evil, and He does not tempt anyone.
yes,
Each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. And when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death.
yeah,
And so the crown of life, which the Lord has promised, in some, I mean, not, I don't know if there is probably a lot deeper to go, but part of that is just life.
yeah,
Because
right,
with outside of Him, we are dead. We're
right,
going to die.
yes, yeah,
Sin is going to kill us. And if we do not trust in Jesus Christ, that will be the
yeah,
end of that.
yeah,
And whether we're burning in hell for eternity or whether we're just in complete separation and we completely die and no longer cease to exist, either way, we're apart from,
apart from God, right,
and that is not life.
yes, yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think some of it is like, you know, some of it can be taken in the spiritual sense and some of it can be taken in the physical sense too,
mhm.
of saying physical sense wise, when we bow to temptation, there's a lot of temptations that can lead us to physical death, you know.
True. Yeah.
There's I mean,
So there's drugs.
all
Drugs gonna
yeah,
kill
I
you.
mean, drugs can kill you, all
Uh,
kinds of things can
yeah.
can
Gun
kill
battles.
right.
Gun battles will kill you.
Gun battle will kill
I
you,
mean,
right. uh
yeah.
um it is interesting in there that whole like I'm God doesn't tempt people to evil, you know. Um
That is just so reassuring.
it is, right?
That is a reassuring thing
Like we don't have
because
a gotcha like we talked about in the sermon. I put a big gotcha up there. We don't have a gotcha God, and
yeah.
that's the way a lot of people look at God as some sort of, you know, divine being that's waiting up there,
Mm.
just waiting for us to do something wrong and
Yep.
sticking some wrong stuff in here. Try this, and James is like, no, that's not the way the way that God works. Like he allows stuff that happens to us. He allows trials to enter our life, but he's not the one. He's not saying do something that he's not tempting us. He's not enticing us to do something that's against his will.
Man,
Yeah.
it is so interesting. I mean, it would just be really interesting to know. We're not going to know to know how these words came into James' mind.
But right?
You know, I mean,
Like what was the situation behind it?
yeah, because it's an incredible letter,
Yeah.
and not taking away from James, but I am a little bit in the fact that it is God breathed
Yeah. Yeah.
through
Right. It's
his
God's
brother
word
James,
through James.
and that really is incredible
Yeah.
because when you look at it that way, God is telling us, "I will not tempt you,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I am not going to be tempted.
Yeah.
I cannot be."
He
So
cannot
it's
be
pretty
tempted.
powerful.
That is pretty powerful.
And then there's a big warning directly from God,
Yeah.
which is, if you don't do this, if you do not listen, it is going to kill you
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's interesting I mean, there's something that's between the lines there too, of like, you know, uh Satan is a real spiritual being in our real way in our world.
mm,
But when James is talking about this, he doesn't even say Satan tempts you to do it, right?
yeah,
Like he's like each person is tempted when he is enticed by
by
his
his
own
own.
evil
Yeah,
desires.
that's true.
Like we have evil desires inside of
Right,
us, apart from God, apart from Satan.
right.
Our natural propensity is to do evil things.
Well, we give Satan way too much
Oh
credit
yes, right.
because, like, I don't even think that Satan's really around all over the place. I
No,
mean,
he's not.
he
He's
he
not
does roam
omnipresent.
around,
Yeah,
which we know, but that's right. He's not everywhere,
yeah.
and he's probably not. He has some much dumber minions that might
Right.
that might be around my neighborhood. But
Yes.
as far as he goes,
Yeah.
and we give him a lot of credit, like oh, Satan made me do it.
Right.
No, Satan didn't make you
Yeah.
do it. Now, from the very beginning, Satan has
Yes.
rebelled, and he will pay the price for that.
Yeah.
And that did lead to where we are today.
Right.
But yeah, he's not that big of a deal.
Yes. Yeah.
And his days are numbered. So
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, but there's a sense that there is a sense because we were just talking before the podcast when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. He's like,
yeah,
"You Pharisees, you're actually sons of the devil."
right.
And you think about us in our
Ooh,
unredeemed state
yeah,
before we put our faith in Jesus Christ, before we before that is taken care, that sin is taken care of. Our natural propensity is to be children of the devil, right? I mean, that's our
mm,
natural state before we find him. That's what our flesh is. We are children of the devil. Um, and just thinking about how that affects every decision that we make. It's not the devil sitting on our shoulder doing it.
right.
It's part of our own human
It's
nature.
right.
Uh,
Which makes the renewal piece, and it makes when we put our trust in Jesus, it makes it even more
oh, I
of
know,
of
right?
a powerful thing
Yeah.
that we should find insane amounts of value
Oh, I know.
as far as just like that was then, this is now,
Yes.
and it's not the same. And
Yes.
I'm going to look in the mirror because that's the next thing
Right?
I'm going to look into the mirror and I don't see my natural
Yeah.
self. I don't
Yeah.
see the child of the devil. I see God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, So,
Awesome.
and he just gives a reaffirmation of that, of just saying, look, if it's something, every generous act and every perfect gift is from above. And it's just that, like, Satan doesn't want what's best for us.
No.
Our personal, our inside of ourselves, there's not good stuff that comes out of. Yeah, sinful people can do things that are seemingly good in the world, but generally, as a general sense, it's not driven by the right motive. I mean, if I had $1 million which I don't. But if I had $1 million and I gave it to somebody, it wouldn't be truly altruistic. It wouldn't be just like, oh, I just want what's best for whatever people these are. It would be so that you noticed me and you said, hey, here's a nice guy, right? I would do, or maybe I want the person I'm giving the $1 million for them to think that I'm a nice guy. It's not the gifts that we give as humans, the gifts that seem like gifts, at least. The true, perfect, good ones are from God, and he just reaffirms that, like, God's not giving gifts of temptation; he's giving good gifts.
Yeah.
Um,
But if you gave me $1 million, I'd think
well, yeah. If I had,
I'd be appreciative,
right?
I'm just letting you know.
Sure. I would feel good about that.
Yeah,
right?
I would feel good. Take it.
Right. And then he kind of follows it up there because he says, by his own choice, he gave us a new birth by the message of truth, that we would be the first fruits of his creation. And it's almost echoing that same thing back again. He's saying, uh, every generous act and every perfect gift. And the generous act is by God's own choice, and the perfect gift is new birth by the message.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's just saying, here's an example. Here's the example of what a generous gift and a generous and perfect gift looks like. That we've been given a new birth by God's generous choice. So, yeah, he just kind of highlights that, like, God's not giving us trials and temptations. He's given us this good and perfect gift of a new life through Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and knowing that Jesus Christ was God's first fruits.
Yeah.
And then for James to say, so that we would be a kind of first fruits.
Yeah.
Again, that's
Yeah.
insane. That's
It is.
value.
Right.
Because if we're a kind of first fruits, that means that we are truly set apart.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and if anybody listening to this wants to go learn more about first fruits, I did write down Leviticus 23, 9 through 14, Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 19, and then Exodus 23, 19 will teach you all about the Feast of First Fruits.
Yeah. And just how God
pointed that was.
How God pictures
Yeah.
what Christ does for us in the way that he had the Israelite people worship him, and how that is a living illustration of what it means to be first fruits. And we talked before the podcast about that idea of first fruits being this compound word that means set apart.
Yep.
And something new.
Yep. Something new
that's been set apart.
And it's new every year.
Yes.
We have new crops and every year. And so it's a constant focus or constant renewal.
It was a constant reminder for them.
Yeah.
Of being new and set apart, and what that was looking forward. And James is like, okay, this is a realization of what that reminder was about all along, is like Jesus Christ, the first fruits. He's a new, set apart, in that he's resurrected. We're the first fruits, are the first, or at least James listeners. We're down the road a little ways, but James listeners were the first of something that was completely new. Like believers and followers in Jesus Christ, that was completely new. It was a new thing to the people around him, and in some ways we're the same way. It's that idea we're set apart, new by a new birth. That's just kind of mind blowing when you think about that.
Yeah.
We could probably go on for a long time in that idea around first fruits.
Well, I also that we be kind of first fruits, and I know it's a little bit of a transition, I guess, here, but in a few verses later, it talks about the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. And this is something that over my life I haven't haven't been good at this, and it's something that I've been researching a little bit when it comes to organizational, just basic leadership,
Hmm.
and that is the idea of power of words, and the idea of an organization, which a church is one,
Hmm.
or the body of believers being like that type of collective organization or
Sure.
or group, that there is a culture, or
Yeah.
that group has a culture, and we have
Hmm.
lots of different cultures, but that there that is alive, that we
Yeah.
are alive,
Yeah.
like our church is alive, or the body of believers is alive, and so there is some, like, we would be a kind of first fruits. How do we communicate that? How do we communicate that value that that we have
Hmm.
in Jesus Christ? How do we communicate that to the church? How do we communicate that to our children and our families? And we do that through God's word.
Hmm.
Receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. And that's a thing that I haven't done a good job at in my life, is implanting words, words, right? Well, like
Right.
we tend to be very critical.
Sure.
Like I do. I tend to be
Yeah.
critical. Or in some cases, when somebody is struggling with something,
Yeah.
whether that's an addiction type thing or whether that's a sin issue, whatever that may be, the word is usually, well, stop doing that because that's bad
You're
and
right.
that's wrong, versus implanting the words of God.
Hmm.
All that remains of wickedness in humility receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls.
Yeah.
Those words will change you.
Yeah.
It won't just, like, your own will and self willpower is not going to change
Yeah.
you. The words of God are going to
Yeah.
change you, just like a leader changes an organization
Sure.
by the words that he
Yeah.
uses or
Eh,
she uses
yeah.
to lead those people. And so in our case, we're being led by God. So we receive his word implanted,
Yeah.
which is renewal.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
even just, I mean, you could even just take that, maybe even I don't know that I would say a step further, but just say
Yeah, let's
the
go.
word implanted there is it's the good news, it's the gospel, right?
It's the
I
gospel.
mean, it
Yeah.
is the word implanted is the gospel, and like you said in here in 18, he says the message of truth. I mean, I think that's the same thing. He's talking about the same thing. The word implanted, and I love this picture that James puts down. He's like, when he says this, humbly receive the implanted word, right before that, he says, therefore, ridding yourselves of all moral filth, humbly receive the implanted word. And so, like, there's a message there of us, like, we need to be the people that are carrying that word, the gospel, to other people.
Hmm.
Um, but also it's this idea that when the word's implanted in our life, he's like, okay, now uh rid ourselves of moral filth and evil. Even though that comes first in the sentence, the idea is like the word is already implanted, right? It's implanted, it implies that the word is there already.
That's a really good
You
point.
know,
Yeah.
the word's been planted, and we need to tend our garden. I mean, when I read that, that's the picture I get of a garden.
Mm.
We're getting ready to plant our kind of usually pathetic little garden in our backyard, and you prepare the soil, you put the seeds in the ground. But if you don't take care of the weeds,
That's right.
if you don't take care of the weeds, the seeds don't do very well.
Right.
you know and I think James uses a lot of word pictures. I mean, he is like the king of word pictures in his writing. He used them all over the place. And just that one word of saying something is implanted or engrafted is the translation. But like, you look back at the original Greek, and it is the idea of planting a seed, right? It's a picture of like
Hmm.
the gospel is planted in our life, and when we understand what that gospel is, we want that to flourish. We want that to grow in our lives. And so we're weeding the garden as it goes along, or we're depending on him to weed the garden. But uh, in the same way, there is some responsibility that we bear, and there is some direction that he gives for us to say,
Mm.
you know, you got to take care. You got to take care of your garden. Anyway, I think it's a really good picture there.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay. What about verse 23? For if anyone is a hearer, I know we kind of talked about this a
yeah,
little bit, but just as far as when he looks at himself in the mirror, um, he sees his natural state, or he is like a man who looks at his natural face in the
yeah,
mirror, if he is a hearer and not a doer. Um, so here's where it kind of gets a little controversial, I guess,
yeah.
because it's not saying, well, he doesn't just hear it and believe it,
Hmm.
he is doing it.
Yeah, he takes action, right? I mean, I think in some ways when James says this, it doesn't sound really funny when we read it. But I think it is kind of that sense of humor of saying, you know, how silly is it to look at the mirror and say, there's something wrong
Mm.
with the way that I look. You know, I get up in the morning and I've laid on the side of my head and my hair's sticking straight up over here, and you know, I've got uh, whatever it is, mismatched socks, or you know, I'm not wearing clothes that match, and I don't fix the problem before I go ahead. That seems kind of silly, and I mean, that's really the picture. James is like, if uh, anybody looks at God's word or hears God's word
And does not
and
follow,
doesn't
does not
do it,
obey.
yeah,
He is looking at his
yeah,
natural face in the
yeah.
mirror, and
And I like that he puts in there that deceiving yourselves. That deceiving yourselves is in here in this passage, in James chapter 1. Deceiving yourselves is in there 3 times, or deceiving is being deceived is in there 3 times.
mm,
In verse 16, it says, "Don't be deceived." But here it's like, don't deceive yourselves. And in verse 26, he talks about, you know, if we think our religion is valuable or our worship is good, but we don't control our tongue, we are deceiving ourselves. Um, and that's what he's saying. Like, you look at the mirror and 2 things happen. Either you see something that's wrong and you don't fix it, or you look at the mirror and you tell yourself a lie that you look fine,
mm,
you know, and then you walk away from it. And I think I think he intentionally did that when he gave this illustration, but I think there is that propensity for us to look at the mirror and be like, yeah, I'm good enough. This is okay. I look pretty good, you know, uh, and just walk away from it and say, this is good. I look good. What I'm doing is fine. I mean, justifying ourselves is kind of is a big thing that we run into when we are thinking about being right with God. We want to justify ourselves. We want to say, yeah, I know, God, what you say is, I'm doing something that you say is wrong, but you know, that's the easiest thing. It's like, I know I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, that
mhm.
you say is wrong, but you know,
What if you're not
this,
doing anything? What if you're not doing anything we consider wrong,
sure.
but you're not taking action?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably some of it too. You
Because
know,
that's something that challenges me because,
and I'm like,
um,
if you're thinking you're not doing anything wrong, I think you're probably that whole, like, I've deceived myself already.
sure.
You know,
Well,
I
or
mean, it wouldn't, maybe it's not like a big thing,
yeah,
right? Like, I'm not living in adultery. I'm not addicted to pornography.
right.
I'm not drinking myself stupid every weekend. I'm pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I'm going to church on Sunday, but am I and I say orphans and widows, am I visiting orphans and widows in their distress? Now, I think it's easy to go, oh, okay, well, we got to go and take care of orphans and widows. Well, the point was is that especially in the context of this time, orphans and widows, unlike, see, even like today, we have a lot of charities that reach
Sure.
out to orphans. We have all. I mean, we're especially in our society here in
Hmm.
in America. There's a lot of, I don't know,
Programs.
programs
Yeah.
that take care of people. So we don't see it as much. But in this time, an orphan or a widow would have been like
Yeah.
complete like uh women were very reliant on
Yeah.
their husbands
Yeah.
in that time for money and for support and for shelter and all that. So a widow may lose all of that.
Yeah.
Orphans were in the streets,
Yeah.
completely forgotten about
Yeah.
by society. And so they were the least, they were the and so I think what it's saying for us today, the way I read it, is to visit the least, like
Yeah.
those that are completely forgotten about, completely discounted and disrespected and discredited or and not supported, and to be there in their distress. And so I can go to like, and in their distress is pretty crazy because there are people who are in complete distress. And this is a challenge for me because yeah, I can go to church, not use bad language, not have all the dictions you talked about, and really live a pretty good life in Midwestern United States.
Yeah.
But am I visiting the least in their distress?
Yeah.
Am I really doing that? And are we doing it
Yeah.
as a church or as a body of
Sure.
believers? Are we doing that? And
Yeah.
so it's challenging.
Yeah. It is a really, to me, it's a big challenge as well of like, what does that look like and how do we do that? And how do we look at uh, the people that need to be protected and cared for? Um, and sometimes you think about that, and I think sometimes even when I think about that, beyond just the physical widows and orphans, I'm like, do I care about people that are spiritually
Distressed.
distressed?
Yes.
Do I
Yes.
care about people that are spiritually distressed? Because it's really easy to walk by somebody and just be like, you've got some problems.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
like,
Right.
you've got real problems and you
Right.
should take care of those.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's easy for me to do.
No,
I do it all the time.
I do
It's
it
like,
too.
and,
Yes.
and you're like,
Hmm.
and I've got the spiritual food and the spiritual sustenance that they need. And I'm not willing to share that with them, even though they need it. I'm not trying to spiritualize the text here, but I don't think it's a long jump to say,
Oh, I don't think it's a jump at all.
yeah,
I mean, it is spiritual.
to say, hey, my act of worship, because that's what when it says uh, pure and undefiled religion,
Yep.
that religion that's talking about your act of worship. How do I express my worship to God? Um, and that's not just singing on a Sunday morning. That's not just, it's not specifically putting money in the offering plate. It's not going to church necessarily. What is my undefiled religion? It's like the people that need
Yeah.
that need to hear about Jesus Christ. They need to have their physical needs met. They need to have their spiritual needs met. Uh, am I going out after those people? Am I caring for those people?
Yeah.
And I have to say, sometimes I I might even say most of the time, I just am not. I'm like, you got yourself into this mess, you get yourself out of it,
Right.
and I'm not very good at that part. Sometimes that's a very convicting part of James when he's talking about that of like, how do you take care of that? Like the second part when they're like, keep yourself unstained by the world. Like we like to think we do a pretty good job of that part of like, all this stuff that the world is about. I don't want to do a bunch of worldly things, right? And we focus on that part, but the other part we have a tendency to neglect that part, I think.
Yeah. Which is which is the sin of partiality,
And that's what
which is
that's
chapter
what we're going to
2.
talk about this next
Yeah.
week.
So what are we
Yes.
talking about next week? Or
Yeah,
this, our guest this coming
This
Sunday?
coming Sunday, yeah, just talking about that. Um, James talks about the sin of partiality that the people in the church are practicing, and they're saying, you know, your value as a person, your value as a believer is based on how much money you have.
Mhm.
I think some of it is how you look on the outside. Um,
Yeah.
and we assign value based on that, I think we'll be able to draw some parallels between what kind of job you have and what kind of income bracket you're in. Those are pretty close to that. You know, sometimes I think we do this spiritually too, of like, there's people that look very pious and very religious, and we tend to give them deference over
Right.
people that come in and they're like, hey, I've been in a drug addiction and this is my third marriage, and I come into the church and we're like, we treat those people like they're a project.
Yep.
And I
Stand
think
over there.
yeah, right. Like, you know, I've worked in youth ministry for a lot of years, and one of the things that probably irritated me the most over all the years that I did, and it's not something that's happened here, but I used to work with a big youth group, with a lot of kids in it, and I had parents come to me on multiple occasions and be like, yeah, I don't know if my good Christian kid should be going to youth group, because there's some kids there that are just not very good, not very good kids. And I was just like, that was a jaw drop for me. And I think it should be a jaw drop for all of us. But we do it in a bigger sense, I think, in church as well. Of just saying that person doesn't look like,
Right.
they don't look like, or their background isn't a good background that's gonna put it, you know, to be a good influence on the rest of us.
Yeah, I
You
guess
know?
the caveat would be as long as they're not being allowed.
Right. As long as they're,
Yeah.
as long as they're not actually dragging these kids
Right.
out into sin. Yeah, there's a definite.
But instead of asking, or instead of, you know, really, my question would be for my own, you know, my own kids, like, how are you showing them
Right.
God's love and
Yeah.
and who He is, and helping lead them
Yeah.
to Him, and obedience in Him and renewal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because yeah, God can bring renewal to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so this is really
Cool.
going to talk about how we're really going to talk about a little bit about how church has an insular. We have a tendency to very insulate ourselves against what's out there in the world, instead of saying we have the message of the gospel,
Yeah, we have
which
the
is the light.
Yeah.
And when Jesus is like, don't hide the light under the bushel, that's exactly our tendency to say, we're going to protect ourselves from the world, instead of saying we're going to take the message of the gospel out into the world. And you know, here he's specifically talking about monetary inside the body, but I think that there's some really good parallels that we're going to draw outside of that. So
Cool.
that's where we're headed.
All right.
Yeah. So
Is there anything else?
I don't think so. Is there anything else? Anything that God's been just teaching you, just out of the?
No, I've been bringing it up there have been
go.
some things, but I've been bringing it up. I mean, one is that is just that idea of renewal and identity that we've talked a lot about, and like I brought up a couple of weeks ago with awe and wonder. That's something that's been kind of forefront in my mind, and what that looks like, being in awe of God. But and then as far as words go, the speaking of words,
Sure.
and what that means, of how we can actually, for good and bad, determine who we are, kind of, in a way, and who somebody else becomes too, or our group. Like, if you're in a leadership position, you can kind of determine, for good and bad, where your group is headed.
Yeah.
And that goes for churches all over the place too, because there's a lot of times where the leadership just takes the church in a direction that is away from God, actually. You know, and because there's power in that, and you can do that through words.
Sure.
And so that's something I've been learning.
Oh, that's really cool.
Been studying that a little bit, and it's something that I want to put together with on wonder, renewal, all of it goes together.
Just put it all, wrap it up in one big package. And,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
yeah, it's just something
Yeah.
something I've been reading and researching a little bit on. But
That's
yeah, no.
So we had so in life group, we've been doing some character studies in life group of different people. And I think one that kind of hit me last night, and I have to say it hit me during the study and not necessarily when I was prepping the lesson.
Okay.
Yeah. But we were just talking about Elijah, we've been talking about the idea of courage and how some of these people respond in courage. And we talked about the story of Elijah and what happened right after the encounter he has on Mount Carmel.
Okay.
Where, if you're not familiar with the story, Elijah is faced off against a bunch of prophets of a pagan deity, Baal.
Mm-hmm.
They're faced off on the mountain, and Elijah's like, whichever God answers with fire, that's the true God. And there's this whole thing they go through. They put their sacrifices on the altars, and Elijah's kind of talking some smack because he's like, your God isn't answering. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he's asleep, whatever. And then Elijah puts his sacrifice out there. He pours gallons and gallons of water all over the thing. And then he prays to God, and God consumes the offering and the rocks and the water in the trench, the whole thing. And it seems like it's just a spiritual high moment of like, Elijah, you respond in faith and God answers, and it's like this super cool picture. But we looked at the chapter right after it, and the chapter right after it is he goes back to the capital city, and the king's wife says, I'm going to kill you. And he flees. He flees that country. He flees the nation of Israel. He goes as far south as he can get. And then he ends up basically on Mount Sinai at the end. And it's a really kind of a low moment, and a really, like you would say, maybe a not respond in faith moment of like, he gets to the desert and he's like, God, take me because I'm tired. And it was just a really good, to me, it was just a really good reminder of God just saying, hey, when I've got a job for you to do, I'm going to provide what you need to do the job. And that's ultimately what happens. God, there's a whole, like God, there's a wind and a earthquake and all these things, a storm. And then God answers in a small voice and is like, here's what I want you to do, Elijah. And he provides food for him on the trip. Mm-hmm. But it really was an encouragement of just like, Elijah's like, I'm the only one left that's following you, God. And God's like, actually, I've got 7,000 people that haven't bowed to Baal.
Yeah.
And it was just to me an encouragement of like, it's really easy to get to the point where you're like, you feel pretty isolated and alone as a believer. And just a huge encouragement. So that's what I've been. Yeah, that's what I've been learning this week. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we did Paul.
Oh yeah.
The last 2 weeks of life group, we have been studying the courage and faith of Paul, and that was pretty incredible just to go through that together, and we learned a lot from each other. But Paul, you'll see this in like little, like on LinkedIn and stuff. It'll be like, courage is not the absence of fear, or it's not, sorry, courage, is not the absence of fear. You'll have fear.
Yeah.
It's like pushing through it.
Yeah.
And God, if with God there,
yeah,
you may still have some fear.
Yeah.
And we saw that from Paul. Just, he had fear not only of just maybe failing himself, or fear of, there was even like a little bit of fear of how, fear of death and
right.
being, because and then we went through all the things that happened to Paul.
Yeah.
Like being snake bit, 3 shipwrecks, all that stuff,
all the stuff
over and over and over again. And then like fear of anxiety on how the church is doing.
Yeah,
It's like, it is all the whole gambit of like the whole spectrum of things that were in his head or physically happening that were fearful. But through it all, he
Right.
trusted God. And the whole time you see this, like you can see in how he writes and how he shares what's going on that he almost, it's almost like he has no choice. Like he knows he had an experience like right on the
Right.
road to Damascus. It's like like a crazy conversion
Yeah.
experience here where he goes blind, that whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And now he has no choice.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's pretty cool. Even though there's fear, he has no choice. And he ends up, you know, paying for that with his
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
and being beaten and all kinds,
All kinds of yeah.
and after he's been beaten, he and Silas are singing.
Yeah, right.
Right. So we learned a lot
That's good.
through Paul's story over the last couple of weeks.
That's good.
So
Good.
cool.
Well, good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. If you're listening today, thank you. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah.